Hello. All right, let's go. I kind of want to start like at the beginning. What do you do and how do you describe your creative work?
So my name is Adebayo Oke-Lawal and I'm the creative director of Orange Culture. It's a fashion brand based in Lagos, Nigeria, which I launched in 2010. So it's been about 12 years now. It's a fashion brand that's based on androgyny and based on the ideology of confronting stereotypes around masculinity and around Africanness, and the way we express our Africanness and gender.
And so I want to know a little bit more about your creative process. Where do you start your concepts for your designs? How does it begin usually?
I think for me, with expressing and creating design, I think it just depends on where I am at the moment, because I'm very much more of an introspective designer. I design based on my current state or based on my current experiences or what is going on or what I feel emotionally connected to. So if it's maybe a situation that's happening in Nigeria at the moment, or it's a relationship, it could be anything. But I think once I connect with it or connect with the story, then that's kind of the base for creating. Because once I have an inspiration board, then I can kind of now move from inspiration phase to how do I take the inspiration from just an idea to actual execution. So from there, it's like how do I design a collection that communicates these feelings, whether it's from the colors I use, the fabrics I choose, how do I communicate that without actually saying anything immediately, So I think that's always the first sort of like strategy that takes place. And then from there, it's like, from fabric is to prints, because we create our own prints. And prints are a very strong part of our story. I mean, even as an African or as a Nigerian, color and prints are a huge part of our culture. It's not a typical black and white. This is not a typical color that you see.
That's not a good example.
But I mean,
Looks
we
great,
do wear
though.
black and white, but I mean, it's a very colorful, like the way we get married, even when we have funerals, everything is so colorful. So for us as a brand, we're a very colorful brand. It's a very colorful expression of fashion and expression of our culture. So I think once we get to that point, we then do prints, we then design, and then we kind of produce, because we produce locally as well. So we then get to production, and it just goes on from there and from there.
You already mentioned that you produce locally, and you say we.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about kind of what collaboration offers you creatively. Like, what are some creatives that you work with?
So I mean, I have my own production team back home, which I've groomed and grown into what it is now. And we do everything in-house. We try to work, which is really tough, because I mean, we work in a country where infrastructurally, especially for fashion, there's not a lot available. Resource-wise, there's not a lot available. So we're working based on what we actually have, which can be sometimes very debilitating when you're trying to create fashion. But I mean, it's one of the best decisions I made, because I've seen a community develop from the work I'm doing,
Beautiful.
And I've seen families bloom because of the work we're doing. So for me, that's an amazing thing. But aside from that, collaboratively, we've worked with people, it's not just even in Nigeria, but even within the continent as well. We've collaborated with artists who have designed prints for us. Elohosal Sunday, we've worked with Dennis Asadebe. We've collaborated with musicians. We've collaborated with weavers, Ashoke weavers. We've collaborated with dyers, like Adirel Lounge. We've collaborated with quite a few, because we have a very huge belief in collaboration, especially within the country and within the continent, because we do believe that, we can move a lot further, faster, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure.
If we all work together rather than just being a one-man island. It's like, me and me alone. I want to be the only one who's in those rooms. I want to be the only person who makes the waves. But if you actually say, I have this platform, how do I bring somebody else onto that light as well, so that they can also have the light on them and on the craftsmanship that they do? You find that, as an industry, a lot happens a lot faster, and you're helping the community, the fashion industry, grow faster by just putting the light on somebody else with your own work as well.
Yeah. And so I understand that you started designing at the age of 10 already. What impact did fashion have on you growing up?
I think for me, fashion just was always kind of a tool for expression, because I mean, I found that I was really quiet growing up, and so I always got excited when I saw fashion, or when I drew, or when I would like try to design, because at first it was like, I don't have the education, but I'm excited to just love to draw. I remember when I started drawing, the first drawings I did were, it was like a magazine, and I did put like paper on it, and I would use like a pen to like kind of shape out a silhouette. through a magazine. So that was how I taught myself to
Kind of
actually
copying it.
Exactly, like copy human form, you know, because I mean, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to learn. So that was the first sort of like intro for me to fashion. And I found that all my teachers, you see, all my school books had fashion sketches on it because I would draw on the back of my school books and be shouted on for doing that. But I found my lights through fashion, you know, it was like, oh, every time I would draw, I'll find some level of fulfillment or joy. And so I find that as a person, when you have something that gives you that kind of joy and gives you some level of like fulfillment, then you should sort of like go after it. So as a child, for me, knowing at such a young age that I found something that I wanted, it made me go for it even harder. You know, it's like I started interning really young. I started working in the fashion industry very young because I already knew from such a young age that this was definitely what I wanted to do, even if nobody else agreed that it was worth the time. But it was like, oh, you know, even if nobody agrees, this is still what I want to do. And when I have the time and when I have the freedom to do it, I will do it. So that was just me as a child dreaming big and imagine the future that I guess I'm having now.
So it's very much like a passion that came from within you.
Yeah,
I love that.
Mm.
And so in the mission text of your label Orange Culture, it says that fashion can and should save lives. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, what you mean by that, and how it can save lives?
I think, you know, people sometimes sort of like minimize the impact of fashion because they just think of it as such a superficial industry. It's like, oh, it's all based on looks. And, you know, I don't, you know, people who wear clothes are so super, all that rubbish.
Yeah.
You know? But fashion has such a huge part to play in community development. And even the way fashion is made, it can impact positively or negatively, from production to manufacturing to the supply chain. Like, there's so much that fashion contributes to people and to a community, you know. So I think when people see it from a deeper point of view, they realize that fashion can actually help a lot of people and can actually save lives, whether it's physically, economically, even emotionally and mentally. There's a lot that fashion can contribute to the way people perceive themselves. I mean, even, let me bring it down to the simplest point, even when you wear fashion, the way you feel when you wear clothes that make you feel beautiful, that psychology is something so magnificent. And, you know, just the fact that people don't even realize that is crazy to me. So, you know, so fashion definitely has a huge part to play in how we perceive ourselves, how society can be perceived, how countries can be perceived, how employment can even be created. You know, when you think about how much fashion contributes to the economy, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, so how fashion even contributes to the waste of the economy is also crazy.
Yes.
So there's so much that we need to realize about fashion and how much it can save lives. So for us, community is such a huge part of how we create fashion, and the work we do with the community is such a huge part of how we function as a fashion brand and as more than a brand, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that that's basically what I mean when I say fashion can save lives. See fashion as more than just making shirts and trousers. It can be a force to actually create socio-economic change.
Yeah. Wow, I'm really like, I love everything that you say totally makes sense to me. So like you're kind of known for like confronting societal norms, and some of the norms that you've been speaking about are hypermasculinity, but also kind of the suppression of the expression of Africanism as well as injustice. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit more. How did it come about that hypermasculinity is such a prominent subject within your work?
I think for me, you know, it's the way I grew up. I mean, I grew up around heightened levels of toxic masculinity and misogyny. I mean, because of and it wasn't even a family thing, it was more just a society thing. You know, I would go to school and be confronted by this, so, you know, I would be bullied because of that exactly, you know. So I found that that was a conversation that no one was having, but it was definitely ingrained in our society, and it was definitely ingrained in our ideology
Still
as well.
is.
Still is, exactly. And so for me, it was like, why is nobody having this conversation? Because they didn't think it was important. And so for me, it was like, you know, how do we create change if no one is starting a conversation about this? So 12 years ago, I started that conversation in my own little community. And it's like, oh, why is no one addressing the fact that this is causing so many men issues? You know, we have such a high rate of suicide in men back home. So many men just killing themselves because they don't have the emotional outlet, or sort of like a mental or whatever outlet,
Freedom.
because they feel like they're not allowed to. And so there's so much that suppression of our vulnerability and our emotionality can do to us. And so for me, it was just really about ensuring that this conversation through my platform is being had, because even for me, it was important as a person, and seeing it even in my parents or in my brothers or in my friends, whatever the case was, I would see men going through this every day,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just like, why are we not having this conversation? And so I just wanted to use my platform to sort of have that conversation.
Yeah. And how would you say does your Nigerian background inform you and your work?
I mean, I think, you know, I've lived in Nigeria all my life. I think, you know, people always like when people say, oh, you know, how do you think of an African? They like a very specific narrative and a very specific, like, expression of Africa.
Yeah.
You know? And for me, it's just like I'm expressing my Nigerianness in my own way and in my own narrative and in my own personal story. So when people, I'm like, yeah, but it's just me. I'm doing me. My stories are mine. My, you know, it's my stories, my journey is all from my being Nigerian and living as a Nigerian. Even from the fact that we source our fabrics back home, we work back home, we produce back home, we do a lot back home. You know,
I can tell.
It's like that's a lot of. That's enough for me to say to even make you realize that, okay, that's enough of Nigeria that you need to, that you've already interacted with, you know. So I think, you know, I find ways, obviously, through my collections, through my stories, through my print making, print designing, to express even fabrics. You know, we sometimes use some of our indigenous fabrics from Astrocade to Adire to also educate people about sort of our culture and our stories. We do all of that, you know. But I think even just being and existing in this current stratosphere, creative stratosphere, is enough to even just be to say that, okay, there's a Nigerian presence in the midst, and it's enough to create questions about Nigeria and to want to be educated about Nigeria.
Yeah, because also, like I already mentioned, like this, you know, this kind of like suppression of the expression of Africanism,
Exactly.
and that you're trying to like, what are ways that you try to like positively affect that within the fashion industry?
I mean, I just basically own my voice, and I think everyone should do that. I think once we begin to own our voice, because the truth is, for many years, we've always expressed Africanism through the white gaze.
Yes.
It's not that it's totally changed, but now you can see that we're clearly now beginning to own our voices and own our culture and own our expressions and reclaim it. And finally say, okay, this is who we are. Like, you've told us who we are for many years, but finally we're saying, you need to listen. Now, this is actually who we are. This is what we do. These are the talents we have. This is the culture we have. This is our background. And finally, our stories are being told by us. And I think that that's really a very important thing, you know, with our platforms, that we're educating people as to the kind of various things that we offer and the kind of richness that also our cultures offer as well. And I think that that's really enough, you know, and just even being someone who owns space, you know, it's like using your platform to also represent, you know, and to show diversity, to show your people, because for us, it goes even to as little as how we cast. If you look at our shows, we cast very specifically. We're like, you know, every show I've been to, I go to shows and they're like, oh, you know, they offer me agency models, and it's like all the models look, they don't look like me, and I'm like, oh, but why? Like, I need people that look like me. Get me models that look like me. And it's just a choice I've made, because I feel like if I have an opportunity, I'm going to create space for myself and for the people that look like me. So it's like, how do I kind of do that? That's basically, I do it at as many levels as possible.
Yeah, and I feel like what kind of comes to mind when looking at your work is freedom, and not just through, through self-expression, through like expression of self, but also cultural heritage.
Yes,
and I'm just wondering, what does freedom mean to you?
I think freedom for me is really just allowance to be. It's like, you know, no holdbacks, no suppression, it's liberty, it's liberation. It's like you're allowing space to just be who you want to be. Nobody is restraining you, and it's about expressing yourself truly and genuinely without questioning that, oh, my expression is a problem for the person next to me, or will be questioned or will be attacked because of how I've chosen to express myself. I think for me, when I think of freedom, I just think of joy, and I think of peace in being yourself. And I think for me, that's really what freedom is. It's just allowing yourself to flourish as yourself and nobody else, not a replica, not a copy, not a version of yourself that fits into what society expects, but just you loving yourself and being yourself 150%.
Agreed. And what do you see in the next generation of fashion designers? Like, is there anything that you see that inspires you?
I think I see, especially for back home, I think I see a love for their home, and a love for where they've come from, and a love for their culture. I think that's one thing because I grew up in a time where, you know, we were told a lot that, oh, you know, outside is better. You know, outside externals, you know, that's what you do for you to build a future for yourself. But I see a generation that's like, no, I want to work with inside. I want to build from within. I want to network with the people around me. I want to support my people. I want to build. And that's such a powerful way to help create a system, I guess, that supports where you've come from.
And a lot of people from the diaspora that want to go back as well.
Exactly. There's an appreciation for home and culture that's so refreshing and so beautiful to watch. And I think that's just amazing.
So right now we're in the middle of an event called What Design Can Do. That's why I want to ask you, how do you see the role of fashion design or a fashion designer in society?
I think the role of fashion designers in society is really to take up space and to take up also the opportunity to sort of speak for your community, because I feel like we have such platforms where we can kind of voice the things that are going on, whether it's good or bad, with the people that we are with or the communities we live in. And I feel like a lot of us sort of miss out on that. It's like, oh, we just want to have cool Instagram and just like pose, but we can literally use our platforms to fight for ourselves and fight for our generations and take up space and also correct things that I feel like maybe, or we feel like maybe are going wrong with where we've come from or with our politicians or our leaders, confront them. And I feel like sometimes we're so afraid to be political. It's like, oh, you know, we don't want to shake, you know, too many tables. We don't want Instagram to suppress our engagement. But it's just like,
very
you know,
real.
it's a real deal, you know, because you don't want to say the wrong thing because you're a business. But at the end of the day, you're an artist, and an artist's job is to make people uncomfortable. So sometimes you do have to make people uncomfortable to confront the things that are going wrong, and that's how corrective measures can be made. So that's what I think a designer's job is, to not just make clothes, but also think of yourself as a force of art and a force of power and a game changer for your community.
And so what do you think is something, looking at the next decade, for instance, we can achieve with design?
I think there's so much we can achieve. We can achieve socioeconomic change, we can achieve ideology changes, we can achieve environmental changes, which is clearly what we're seeing now, which is why a platform like this exists. It's like questioning how we've been designing over the past years and thinking of how we can then design. It's like asking yourself, what can design really do in my society and in my community and in my space? And I think that's really where the next step is. It's like, are we good with where we are now? We're clearly not. So how do we get to where we need to be and still help the environment around us survive? Work with the environment rather than work against the environment or work as saviors of the environment. You know? So I think once we begin to think like that, things will begin to change.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, being present.
Thank you.
For answering my questions.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.